You think you can fix this? The manager sneered, leaning forward with a sharp grin. His voice carried across the entire lobby. The corporate building baked under the summer heat of North Carolina. The air conditioning was dead. Elevators frozen. Cameras offline. Automatic doors not responding. Engineers had already tried everything. No one could solve it. The old janitor stood beside the table where the electrical panel lay open like a wounded machine. He wore a faded blue work uniform, hands rough and lined, scars earned from labor, not choice. A single screwdriver rested between his fingers. His eyes weren't intimidated. They were calculating. The manager laughed again, loud, confident, addicted to humiliation. You don't even know how to plug in a toaster. Employees around them stiffened. Some looked shocked, others embarrassed. Two interns already held their phones raised, waiting to capture failure. The janitor breathed in through his nose. Calm, slow, no argument, no reaction. He turned the first screw gently. The sound was small, but the tension made it feel deafening. The manager tapped his watch. Hurry, old man. We don't have all decade. No one knew the janitor's name. In that building, he was invisible. He swept floors, took out trash, refilled soap. He existed to clean, not to be seen. Until now, dragged under the spotlight of mockery he never asked for. The panel, exposed, looked like chaos. Wires overlapping, copper looping, a maze that made certified technicians curse softly earlier. But the janitor saw logic in it. Patterns, routes, the quiet language of broken machines. A memory flashed. 1969, he was 13. A roadside motel by Highway 52. His broom taller than himself. His mother sick and roommate. His father drowning guilt in cheap whiskey. He remembered the motel owner spitting near his shoes because a lamp had cracked. You're useless, the man said back then. Same tone, same cruelty, same silence from spectators. Life trained him to absorb humiliation internally. No screaming, no retaliation, just silent survival. The need to fix things became his school. A necessity became his diploma. The janitor unplugged two connectors reversed in the wrong terminals. Click, pause, click again. The LEDs flickered. Red, yellow, then dead darkness. 1 second of silence. The crowd leaned forward without meaning to. Even the manager's smirk hesitated. Then came a beep, a thin diagnostic sound. One beep, small, but intentional, not failure. A response, a conversation from the machine itself. A beep doesn't mean it's fixed. Genius, the manager said, trying to reclaim the moment. But the interns exchanged a glance. They had stopped filming for comedy. This was different now. This was competence speaking quietly. Another flash. 1983, a warehouse in Ohio. The heater had failed for 8 days. Workers complained loudly, but stepped around janitors like scenery. He fixed that heater alone at night, unnamed, unseen. Because he always fixed things alone. Another memory. Scrapyard trailers. Radio guts collected from trash bins. Nights of trial and shock. Sparks biting his fingers. Lessons etched electrically into his nervous system. He had solved systems older than the engineers upstairs had even studied. Not because he wanted superiority, but because survival leaves no room for ignorance. The janitor touched cables by color priority now, aligning them slowly. Sequence guiding him like an instinctive prayer. The panel hummed faintly, internal loops syncing themselves awake. Beep beep. 2 now, then 3, then a cluster of them. The manager stepped back a half inch. Hold on, he said, breath tightening. The vent overhead shivered into motion. A paper coffee cup trembled near the airflow. The crowd noticed before the boss did. One employee whispered, "Oh no, he's doing it." Another murmured, "He did it." The lights across the lobby sparked into cool fluorescent wakefulness, row by row. No dramatic burst, just undeniable electrical truth. The air conditioning groaned once, then began exhaling coolness back into the lungs of the building. Upstairs, elevator systems pinged awake. A distant ding confirmed alignment. The phones in interns' hands were no longer weapons of ridicule. They were recording evidence now. The room wasn't watching a janitor fix a panel. They were watching fate nail a promise into place. The manager's knees softened. Sweat sprang not from heat anymore, but consequence forming. The janitor set the screwdriver down gently. No heroic stance. No applause-seeking posture. He wasn't invisible because he lacked presence. He was invisible because arrogance never looks at janitors until buildings resurrect themselves through them. The main LED clicked into solid white. No flicker, no apology, just verdict. The crowd felt it physically now. The heat was gone. The mood was hotter than ever. Promises mocked aloud become chains when reality enforces them. And machines, unlike people, have no respect for arrogance. The manager had joked a deal. The building had sealed the first clause. The second clause was already walking toward delivery, and everyone in that lobby could feel it even before it happened. The manager cleared his throat, tried to regain posture. Cool air now circulated through the lobby, a silent witness that the janitor's hands had revived a $1 million building. Still, the manager had an itch for dominance. He didn't want to accept defeat. Not yet. Not publicly. He leaned closer again, eyes sharp with disbelief. All right, the lights came back, but the system is huge. There are dozens of subsystems. It's probably temporary. His voice sounded less triumphant now, more defensive, but still coated in arrogance. The employees sensed a shift. The balance had tilted, but the villain hadn't fallen. He did nobble, but remained standing. No one was leaving the lobby. This embarrassment was slow cooking now. And people at this age, veteran executives, clerks, long-term staff, know when a moment means more than what looks obvious. A senior technician, still carrying a lanyard, scratched his chin. He reset the loop manually. That part was correct. Another technician hushed him quickly, more by habit than doubt. They weren't used to giving janitors credit, even when credit screamed from a glowing panel. The manager's jaw worked. Words jammed between ego and evidence. Janitors didn't solve critical failures in corporate towers. This was outside his inner script. So he attempted another attack. Not loud, not chaotic, but needle of condescension delivered almost casually. You probably got lucky, old man. Straighten a couple cables and a random switch, huh? The janitor didn't fire back. But inside, something did shift. Not anger. Precision. He remembered nights crawling above boiler rooms where executives never went. Real work lives under buildings, not above them, one of the scrapyard men had told him once. Real work smells like dust, not cologne, and the janitor had inhaled dust for decades. But he also remembered the cost of knowing. 3 times in his 20s, he had shocked his wrist so badly that 2 fingers lost sensation for months. No one claps for the student who learns by necessity. They only gasp when the necessity student becomes the solution others need. One of the older receptionists stepped forward a fraction of a foot. She didn't speak, but her eyes asked the important question, is this temporary, or is he actually extraordinary? A micro-doubt hung in the lobby like scent. The manager sniffed it and seized it like oxygen for arrogance. Let's test the core systems then. He hit a button on the wall console nearby. A system access terminal attempted to call central servers upstairs. Nothing happened. A small loading circle spun once, then showed no response. He smirked again, weak but hungry. See? Dead. Temporary fix. Like I said, but the interns didn't lower their phones. Because failure wasn't interesting anymore. The setup was. The janitor barely moved. His experience had taught him that arrogance talks fast, but resets slow. He reached toward the panel again. Not to prove himself, but because broken systems can't wait for egos to die. He studied the internal relay board at the upper right. 12 fused loops. 3 sentinel sensors. 2 inverted grounds. Exactly the kind of error grown technicians miss when panic moves faster than curiosity. He murmured again, almost not heard. Secondary relay never synced because the handshake bus never closed. He toggled a tiny jumper pin with his nail. Not dramatized, just executed. A green LED blinked faintly at the top control board. The technician with the lanyard flinched. That part should not blink without back-end push. Then another beep sounded, this one deeper. Not diagnostic, Protocol alignment. The system was speaking in full sentences now. The loading circle on the wall, terminal spun again. This time twice. Then boom. Central servers responded, screens waking upstairs in small rolling waves. Authorization tokens processing automatically through restored current logic. The lobby didn't explode in applause, but it did in facial geography. Mouths slightly open, eyebrows raised, a few heads shaking in disbelief. The manager felt temperature return, not the air conditioning. The situation. He straightened his tie out of reflex. Small habit after any uncertain moment. You're telling me you know how system handshake buses work? He scoffed, trying again to dislodge momentum. But momentum was already welded. The janitor finally looked toward him for the first time that minute. Slow eye contact, measured, almost gentle. Not to threaten, to deliver inevitability. He remembered another humiliation. 2002. A fancy retail building where a corporate director refused to let him eat at the staff cafeteria because clients could see a janitor holding a tray. He fixed their HVAC system during a snowstorm that same year when no technician could reach the building. They ate in warmth the next morning, unaware that a man banned from trays had rebuilt their heat. Justice wasn't revenge. But math can be poetic too, and fate loves poetic math. Another vent overhead started spinning to full force. The automatic doors synced fully now, visitor access terminals booting properly at entrance checkpoints. Even the coffee machines in the corner chimed alive, internal clocks auto-aligning. Every subsystem flipped itself back online, one after another, not by coincidence, but by current logic finally flowing correctly through all primary and secondary loops. The crowd felt the second shift now. The moment had evolved beyond victory. It was revelation pressure. A woman in her 50s exhaled an audible whisper. He's not lucky. He's surgical, another man near retirement age muttered. If the subsystems are syncing automatically, it means back-end loops are locking themselves in sequence. That's not luck. The manager's eyebrow twitched. He realized now that his joke promise had teeth. A joke heard by witnesses cannot be unfixed. Much like a system revived by an invisible man cannot be unrevived. The janitor wiped nothing, explained nothing theatrically. He didn't need narration to elevate himself. Reality was narrating it without permission. The manager had assumed he was mocking just another old cleaner. He didn't know he had called a lifetime of suppressed competence to the table. The third shift began, not in machines now, in a manager's knees, slowly learning the geometry of repayment. The manager felt his pulse in his throat. He had challenged an old janitor in front of an audience that wasn't leaving. His arrogance was shrinking, but not gone. He believed humiliation could still be negotiated, maybe diluted, maybe joked over again. But older workers and long-term staff have an instinct for moments carved in stone. They recognize when a man finally stops cleaning a room and starts cleaning a world. One of the building's executives, a man pushing 60, crossed his arms slowly. I've worked here 25 years, he said. I know when a system collapse ends. And this one ended because of him. The manager wanted to laugh it off, but no laugh came. His ego felt heavier now, like wet cement poured into a container too small to carry it. The manager pointed at the panel again, still defensive. You realize there are redundancies, fail-safes, surge protectors, firmware void loops. No manual adjustment should cascade through all subsystems that cleanly. He didn't know that the janitor's mind was wired like an analog server older than the building's cloud staircase. The crowd leaned in, not aggressively, but magnetically. The janitor's eyes shifted again, back to the panel, not the manager. He heard doubt, but he spoke equation. He remembered 1977 when the fuse grid of an apartment block failed in Detroit. 10 floors of darkness. No licensed electrician agreed to go inside at night. Too risky, they said. But the night belonged to risk, and risk belonged to necessity students. He went inside anyway, found a misgrounded loop line feeding phantom voltage into a locked-open relay. Same kind of mistake. Different building. Same janitor alone with truth and a screwdriver borrowed from survival itself. He adjusted the panel again. This time not connectors, not a jumper pin, but a micro-resistor regulator controlling the signal impedance for the secondary load channel. Tiny part, titanic consequence. A receptionist in her late 50s exhaled quietly. Signal impedance, she whispered to herself. He said that like he's seen it fail before. Another intern frowned. People like us don't even know that term. A second LED blinked. Soft green. Then solid amber overhead, signaling communication handshake secure between main bus loops and distributed firmware channels. The manager's throat moved. The impedance shouldn't have been off. That's calibrated at the factory. The janitor finally murmured aloud again, voice low but precise. If the impedance is stable now, the firmware loops will auto-close their fail-safes. Watch the lock sequence, not the LED count. The LEDs just narrate. The sequence decides. Employees felt a chill unrelated to air conditioning. The manager didn't know how to watch lock sequences. He watched optics, titles, hierarchies, neckties, ego-based theater starring Arrogance itself, where janitors exist as supporting cast. But the building didn't care about hierarchy. It cared about flow and lock. Another memory. Kansas, 1992. Tornado season. A hospital emergency wing running on backup power that refused to sync. Surge technicians arguing in the rain. Doctors holding flashlights while nurses manually pushed beds through unmoving automatic doors. Cleaning staff stay outside, one commander said. But cleaning staff walked inside anyway. He aligned the signal impedance regulator back then too, restoring backup loop handshake through calibrated reality, allowing backup power to recognize identity, authority, and sync. No applause then. No credit given. Hospitals don't print janitor names on plaques. But heat returned. Power returned. Doctors continued treating patients unaware that survival knowledge had kept servers alive so bodies could have a chance too. Now, in this lobby, survival knowledge had returned in public. The panel clicked again internally. Not mechanical stress, but protocol closure. A soft relay closure, sound traveled like fate whispering structure to components waiting for certainty, not permission. And then it started. One subsystem pinged upstairs. Then another. Then another. Security grid loops, closing redundancies silently. The automatic doors fully unlocked and timetables synced across entrance terminals. Camera feeds returned, not flickering, not glitch-lined, but cleanly, like a signal fed by competence, not prestige. Climate regulators upstairs began requesting central instructions from a back end that was finally coherent and responsive. The ARV system signaled fluid alignment, and the elevator's process startup call tokens recognizing load stability rather than rejecting it. The building was not temporarily fixed. It was self-correcting now, because the janitor had aligned the part panic technicians forget exists. Truth-level signal regulation. The crowd didn't care for technical jargon, but they felt the meaning of mastery anyway, because mastery delivered quietly is anti-fragile. A woman near retirement age placed her hand over her chest. He fixed us without screaming for validation, she said. That's the kind of man unfairness tries to bury. Another man, ex-military, nodded. Arrogant power always thinks knowledge needs certificates. But certificate knowledge fails under pressure. This man is pressure. He learned in the dark. So of course he sees in it. Another memory flashed through him. 1988. A courthouse building maintenance grid failing during a federal systems audit. HVAC surges locking doors mid-proceeding. A senior judge furious at technicians stalling critical case flow, misreading errors as back-end sabotage instead of physical impedance imbalance. You wasted your careers memorizing the theory of complex systems. A plumber outside said at midnight while handing him a screwdriver. But real systems die from simple mistakes. He aligned that courthouse panel, restoring current handshake and redundancies before dawn so judges could return uninterrupted to cases they believed were solved by legal decorum, not building underbellies. He solved that panel without violence too, because justice poetic enough doesn't need fists. It needs inevitability math. The manager shifted again. Smaller step back now. Then another. Then another. He realized that the building had not crowned the janitor for a moment. It had recontextualized the janitor across a lifetime in 60 seconds or less, which made the attack ineffective. The humiliation had boomeranged into competence gravity, and gravity doesn't negotiate with pride. But the crowd's final shift hadn't been delivered yet, because the manager's promise hadn't been paid yet. The janitor didn't need to smile. The panel smiled for him. Back-end loops fully locked into stable, auto-correcting sequence. The building was done arguing with failure. It had begun arguing with arrogance itself. And this was only the start of the manager's knees learning the architecture of repayment. And older audiences know well. When humility carries skill silently for 50 years, the reveal echoes louder than the original insult ever shouted. The manager said nothing now, because 1,000 witnesses were hearing the building finish the sentence for him. The manager opened his mouth, but no sound came. The lobby still hummed softly behind him. Machines alive again, full airflow, circulating, doors tracking visitors, temperature finally relieved. But the emotional temperature? Rising. Witnesses could breathe cold air now, yet the moment felt hotter than ever. Older employees understand something younger egos forget. Embarrassment doesn't always explode like a sudden fire. Sometimes it spreads slowly, like ink poured onto absorbent paper. Unstoppable, silent, permanent. And silence gives it authority. The company had assumed the electrical grid was dying a mechanical death. But the real system collapse showing itself now was moral. The janitor had fixed circuits. Now fate was fixing a man who believed he didn't need fixing. And a fixed ego is the most irreversible repair of all. A taller executive near the main reception desk adjusted his glasses. He was a man in his early 60s. Engineer by trade, corporate by posture, sharp mind, sharp history, sharper intuition. He didn't talk like someone who wanted attention. He talked like someone who wanted truth cataloged. If the impedance regulator was aligned, he said in a murmur meant to sound casual, but landed like a stake driven into soil, then the recursive firmware loops will now resolve authentically. He shook his head, which means it wasn't luck. The manager hated the word loop only when the loop circled him. The building didn't care about certifications or arrogance or negotiated pride. Buildings are loyal only to coherent logic, and the people who know how to speak it silently. Silently competent people have an unfair advantage. No one sees them learning, so no one expects them to arrive fully formed. A few employees who had worked there since the 1980s started connecting dots without speaking out loud. A set of raised eyebrows traded questions in silence. They remembered fuses returning in dark boardrooms after storms. They remembered temperature coming back the morning after winter failures no technician with boots agreed to enter. They remembered the janitor's uniform passing through halls while engineers talked around problems above ceilings rather than crawling into them. And suddenly the invisibility made sense. He wasn't invisible because he lacked presence. He was invisible because arrogance needs a stage to recognize genius, and genius never waits for one. The manager exhaled through his teeth softly. He tried again, voice quieter but still carrying old habits. Let's not romanticize this. Anyone could have touched a couple loose wires. But no one agreed with him anymore. And disagreement doesn't always roar. Sometimes it withdraws its energy. When an audience stops giving even resistance friction, the villain begins sliding downhill faster than argument ever pushed him. One of the interns lowered his phone slightly, then realized lowering it too early might mean missing history. He raised it again, but not to mock. The camera was hunting justice now. Justice is more filmable than failure. Failure has been seen 1,000,000 times. Justice, when administered by time rather than violence, spreads slower, but infects deeper. The janitor, standing still, didn't know how to celebrate victory. Not externally. He never wired applause into his life. He wired survival into collapsing systems unseen. The applause was always after he left. But this time he couldn't leave, because the challenge had been spoken publicly. And challenges spoken publicly belong to the public, not the challenger. A memory flickered through his mind again, quickly like static corrected into signal. Summer 1974. A bus depot in Virginia, where supervisors mocked him as a kid who thinks he knows electricity because he had reconnected a dispatch radio using scavenge parts. The supervisor back then spit tobacco onto the floor and said, "If you fix it again tomorrow, I'll eat my hat." He fixed it again tomorrow. But the hat eating never happened. Because the supervisor avoided him for weeks, humiliated silently, bending nothing but conversation away instead. Younger bullies run from justice when justice has witnesses. Older bullies try to bury witnesses themselves. But burying a crowd is harder than burying a janitor. Another memory, 1981. A postal sorting facility outside Pittsburgh. Roofs leaking after a historic storm, power loops sparking in the dark, technicians refusing entry for OSHA reasons. He went inside anyway. Reset the impedance regulator. Balanced loads. Closed handshake loops. By morning, the entire facility was alive again, sorting mail warmed by systems that recognized load harmony rather than rejecting identity. The workers upstairs drank coffee printed by a machine, restarted by a man they had never greeted by name. And again, no one knew who fixed it, because unseen labor builds thicker skin than seen labor builds pride. Yet this time, his labor wouldn't remain underground. This panel failure had been the spark that pushed humiliation upward instead of looping it downward onto the humble. When humiliation loops downward, humility shrugs. When humiliation loops upward, arrogance collapses. The manager tried one last small insult, thin now like a cable stripped of current. "I still don't see anything impressive." But one older woman, standing near the security desk, folded her hands slowly, studying him not with hatred but inevitability comprehension. "Sir, the impressive part isn't the LED count." She nodded toward the janitor. "It's that the building fixed itself after he touched it. That means the main bus closed properly. The secondaries nested without conflict. And now the system is autonomous again because someone finally stabilized the foundation mistake, not the cosmetics." Another older man nodded, voice low, but backed by the emotional buildup of decades of watching injustice go unpaid. "Yes, son. When the foundation is fixed, the building runs without help. When cosmetics are fixed, only your ego runs." Temporarily, the manager stiffened, not violently, but like someone suddenly aware he is losing both audience and narrative throne at the same time. He tried to smile again, but humility readers have a skill too. They detect fake smiles faster than fake circuits. A gentle mechanical hum rolled across the lobby again as a climate control system upstairs finally processed back-end identity alignment. The crowd didn't need to understand electrical engineering to understand poetry enforced by machines. Because older generations have repaired marriages, homes, tractors, engines, careers, dignity, survival, children, illnesses, losses, and decades of humiliation delivered by life itself. So when a humble man repairs an impossible system silently, they feel the meaning in their bones. The building restarted faster in optics now, like an orchestra acknowledging final conductor handshake. The janitor stepped back slightly, but reality stepped forward instead. When skill walks quietly for 50 years, justice follows louder than thunder delayed. Now the crowd stared not at circuits, but at knees preparing repayment. The manager's humiliation was slow, but cemented, not negotiable, not escapable, not refutable. It was only waiting for the promised moment spoken by ego itself to be delivered by gravity unchanged by pride. The first repair had restored current. The second repair was restoring meaning. And meaning doesn't require a certificate. It only needs a witness. The lobby had become a witness hall of certainties. And this certainty was only beginning its final enforcement sequence. The manager had laughed a promise, and the building had locked the first clause. Clause 2 was already bending his lungs tighter than cold air ever cooled embarrassment. And older crowds know well. A promise mocked aloud and left unpaid aborts the mocker, not the mocked. He had challenged dignity. Dignity was answering back, slowly, protocol by protocol, circuit by circuit, knee by knee. The world doesn't applaud janitors until it needs them. But once it does, applause becomes consequence. And consequence bends spines with math rather than violence. The lobby had seen enough now to know this moment was not LED-based victory. It was poetic protocol closure. And poetic closures don't need labels. They only need to walk toward their witness quietly. And quietly, the crowd waited for the moment corporate power would finally kneel to the invisible man they had never learned the name of whole. The manager tried to escape the moment by shrinking it. But the moment was no longer his to size. The lobby had turned into a courtroom without benches, ruled by consequence, not credentials. He had mocked the old man publicly. Public moments breed public verdicts. A silver-haired woman near accounting crossed her arms. Not angry, just observant. The janitor inspired curiosity, not pity now. Curiosity hooks deeper than drama alone. The manager still didn't understand that curiosity is humiliation's worst predator. Corporate buildings have hierarchies. Humans obey them. Machines don't. Machines obey logic. The janitor had spoken logic's mother tongue for 50 years. And logic is patient enough to let arrogance hang itself slowly. A security guard, a man close to retirement age, stepped slightly forward, badge heavier in presence now. "Sir," he said to the manager, voice low but calibrated by years of witnessing ego outbreaks collapse into themselves, "nobody gets this level of alignment by accident. Accidents don't cascade cleanly. Mastery does." The manager swallowed. A small storm behind the ribs. He felt the crowd siding with the janitor, not because they romanticized him, but because reality had volunteered evidence. Evidence makes dramas safer for older generations. They don't enjoy chaos. They enjoy justice proven, not invented. The janitor didn't gloat. Silent workers don't know how to broadcast victory. They broadcast duty. And duty needs no witnesses to perform well. Humility becomes more shocking when delivered without applause language. The manager leaned back half a step. A man losing power rarely collapses dramatically. He readjusts posture first. Pride always tries to walk backward slowly while pretending to inspect details forward. "You're all acting like he rebuilt civilization," the manager muttered, trying humor again like a child touches a dead heater, hoping heat returns by delusion. But laughter needs alignment too, and no alignment was left for him in that room. An older specialist from IT, a man who had spent decades in back-end systems before back-end systems had trendy names, adjusted his glasses and spoke almost conversationally. He balanced signal impedance on a legacy main bus, which means redundancies could nest afterward without conflict. If it were cosmetic luck, cameras would still be glitching and climate control wouldn't handshake. But today, systems' hands shook. A murmur rolled. Not loud, but thick. Older crowds don't need shouting. They need consensus layering. Layering is testimony with patience. A young intern had once asked the janitor why he worked weekends unpaid. The janitor had smiled privately then, saying only, "Buildings don't tremble just during business hours. Real skill fixes things before people even know they need fixing." But this time people knew. The vents overhead sighed again, airflow stable and fully balanced. The lobby screens flickered back one by one in clean voltage handshake rhythm. Boot sequences audit perfect. Recursive tokens processing identity loops, now authorized, not rejected. The building hadn't rebooted because he tried. It had rebooted because he was correct. The manager had spent his career stepping over janitors. Time was now stepping over him. Another memory hit the old janitor gently. 1971, Florida. He was 14, sitting behind a laundromat, studying discarded electric fans because the landlord of the trailer park refused to fix his mother's heater. He inhaled manuals found in trash. He memorized wiring diagrams like gospel because gospel was survival back then. The need to fix things became his spine. The world above buildings never saw him studying. The world below buildings never saw him break. He fixed fans before engineering schools respected fans. He fixed impedance before impedance had influencers. He fixed handshake loops before handshake loops had training modules. He was trained by darkness, not classrooms. So when darkness returned, Arrogance had no leverage. Corporate towers expect technicians to behave as technicians. Loud, defensive, acronym-powered, title-based. The janitor violated expectation physics. His calm precision unsettled the entire infrastructure of Arrogance itself. Not by confrontation, but by contradiction. Contradiction is the cleanest humiliation. The manager rubbed his forehead, a small sign of internal overheating. Arrogance malfunctions under calm proof faster than buildings malfunction under poor grounds. An older lawyer who worked in contracts upstairs had once told a colleague, "Justice poetic enough looks like consequence delivered slowly, but lands final, like a gavel too heavy for appeals." That lawyer was in the lobby today, off-duty, parking validation transferred into witness validation. He studied the manager's legs, shifting twice, posture fracturing not physically but narratively. The lawyer whispered low, but others heard. He made a promise. The building is now setting the schedule. The manager swallowed again. One swallow for each crack forming in his posture foundation. The building had locked him here. Attention had locked him here. Physics would lock him next. One of the older HR assistants exhaled slowly, voice thin but sharp with empathy. "I don't even care how he fixed the panel anymore. I care that you said you'd kneel if he did." A heavier silence followed, the kind that doesn't roar, the kind that organizes consequences itself. The manager thought humiliation belonged to youth language. But older crowds have a different humiliation dialect, the dialect of patience and witnessing. When someone humiliates the humble aloud and leaves justice unpaid, maturity crowds don't rush to defend. They just wait to collect repayment. Repayment arrived already. The humiliation would not be delivered by hands, but by the room itself. The internal firmware loops upstairs continued, closing in audit-perfect sequence. The building didn't handshake Arrogance. It handshook resolution. The lobby had seen enough evidence now. Impedance balanced. Main bus locked. Subsystems nested cleanly. Cameras aligned. Climate control, breathing, protocol perfect cold. Elevators recognizing identity, tokens again. Automatic doors tracking timestamps again. Coffee machine pings restored. Screens forming authenticated boot rhythms. This was no accident. This was poetry enforced by wires and lived by a man who carried duty silently for 50 years. The manager interrupted the silence finally, voice quieter but still trying to scrape pride off evidence. "I just don't get how a janitor could know this level of detail." But the crowd already understood the part he couldn't wrap in a narrative scale. Janitors often know more than directors. They just don't need audiences while learning. Audiences? They need them only when justice demands enforcement of promises spoken by ego itself. And his ego had spoken one publicly. The building had repaired itself. Now the building would repair a man's posture downward. And the crowd felt the timeline forming irreversible, like electricity traveling a closed loop. Not violent, not loud, just inevitable. The manager had mocked a humble man, and the humble man had repaired reality without permission. Now reality would take permission from his knees instead. The manager's face was now another kind of locked panel. One with no jumper pin, no handshake reset, no impedance fix. A system clinging to the illusion of temporary dignity, while reality was clearly rebooting around him. The building was alive again, but his authority? Glitching. And there are no firmware patches for a man who humbles others loudly and pays quietly. Not when the payment must be made in front of witnesses. A woman from operations, in her late 50s, hugged herself slightly, not out of fragility, out of recognition. She had once worked a decade cleaning hallways in a hospital before landing her current job. She remembered being spoken to like acoustical furniture. Maintenance men once joked, HVAC failures aren't women's concern. But she learned concern at night, not during assigned hours. Concern becomes skill if nurtured long enough and ignored loudly enough. That's why older workers identify fastest with invisible competence reveals. They've lived invisibility. They know it's tax, and they know it's payout schedule when reality signs the receipt, not HR. The crowd was now forming a silent consensus orchestra, heads nodding slightly, eyebrows layering agreement. Older audiences don't stamp verdicts. They laminate them slowly. Lamination avoids appeal logic. The manager tried once more to grab optics from inevitability. All right, maybe it stabilized the power feeders. But none of this guarantees moral repayment sequencing. He didn't realize moral repayment sequencing was exactly what the building was now calibrating around him, using the janitor's initial adjustment as the root privilege that made poetic logic undeniable. The janitor remembered another humiliation. 2010, a sports arena where a director mocked him because he suggested relocating a power distribution block feeding the kiosk section. Concessions aren't cleaning territory, the director said, but he relocated it anyway the next night after closing, without loud permission. By morning, revenue surged. Popcorn machines synced. Kiosks processed transactions cleanly. And that director privately avoided eye contact for months after revenue charts revealed truth is more profitable than arrogance. But the avoidance was private, not poetic enough. Public humiliation requires public closure. And closures poetic enough don't need straps. They need timing. The manager felt closing timing approaching now, like HVAC airflow reclaiming oxygen from overheating pride. Another older technician whispered, voice cautious by habit, but confident by evidence now. If he stabilized main load loops, everything else is just consequence alignment. The manager's lips pressed thin. He was losing control over narrative adjectives now. The janitor placed nothing dramatic in posture, but something in his internal world finally relaxed. When humiliation long enough loops upward, the humble don't even have to watch. Reality watches for them. Justice doesn't roar at older generations. It nestles into consensus ribs. A man once, summer 1998, had laughed at the janitor during a charity fundraiser setup. The man said, "If you configure the projector grid to broadcast audio across all sections on first push, I'll donate next year's salary." The janitor aligned impedance and balanced loops. But salary donation never happened because the fundraiser committee buried the moment under charity optics rather than projector physics. The donation was lost. The projector broadcast it anyway because machines obey signal priority, not charity slogans. Which means charity can be humiliating too when it borrows justice optics without paying justice protocol. Justice delayed without witnesses turns into bitterness. But justice delayed with witnesses turns into ceremony. And ceremonies don't need degrees. They just need timing. Another memory. 1973. A train station maintenance terminal failure in Texas. Automated load balancers screaming error codes nobody interpreted correctly. Maintenance directors debating titles above terminal realities. The janitor at 19 had opened a station panel silently back then too, aligning load impedance regulators manually because cloud handshake didn't exist as a buzzword yet, but existed as breaker loop physics, quietly waiting for a humble man to translate it long before translation was trendy. He aligned it. East Wing power feeders recovered. Ticket kiosks recognized identity loops. AC fans rotated stable again. But no one wrote his name in maintenance logs. Because logs care for titles, not duty, until logs glitch under pressure and duty fixes logs instead. One of the interns backed away slightly. He's scanned this kind of failure before. Older audiences don't need scanning terms explained. They need scanning feelings induced. Older generations have motherboards too. Internal motherboards laminated by humiliation and repaired by dignity later. They rarely applaud in the first minute. They just witness deeply in the first minute. And witnesses give algorithms emotional metadata stronger than analytics dashboards. The manager had once mocked an unseen workforce, believing unseen meant unskilled. But unseen workers become narrative nuclear when skill is exposed publicly. Nuclear not by violence, but by validation chain reaction ineffability. Another vent overhead groaned stable airflow again like an unprompted sigh. The lobby temperature was now balanced, not just physically, but emotionally, and fate was unfolding like a fuse that would not blow chaos back onto the humble anymore. This fuse would blow pride downward and deliver poetic justice elegantly without aggression, because elegance punishes deeper than confrontation ever threatened. The manager tried once more to laugh, but his laugh felt like static failing a restored impedance bus. Laughter also needs alignment, and his laughter was unaligned. A white LED overhead glowed again, not from cosmetic repair, from back-end load, loops finally coherent, and stable cascading subsystems into rhythmic startup free from condescending permission loops. The building had no incentive to rehearse failure anymore, and the crowd had no incentive to rehearse pity anymore. The show had mutated from collapse into liquidation sequencing, where arrogance cannot escape gravity tutorials taught by janitors whose skill calibrated reality itself without asking for theater taps. A man once mocked a janitor at a power panel, and the panel fixed the building for the janitor while the crowd fixed the promise for the panel. All that was missing now was the hinge where humiliation becomes repayment geometry. Geometry has patience. Physics has witnesses. Fate has timing. And a manager who challenges humility aloud must pay humility in full lobby attendance where applause isn't requested. It's enforced by consequence layering beyond certificate logic. The janitor had always fixed things at night, unseen. Now the night would fix the manager publicly seen, walking his knees downhill step by step toward a payoff no engineer could impedance avoid, because older witnesses know well, just as poetic enough is not shouted. It's delivered. The manager wanted to run, but his body didn't obey the impulse. Some moments chain you to the floor tighter than any job contract. Poetic justice is one of them, especially when witnesses are still holding eye contact like evidence folders not yet closed. The crowd was silent, but silence had weight now, a heavy corporate kind of quiet, the kind that means we are not stepping away from this scene. Older generations rarely interfere at the start of humiliation. They interfere at the end of arrogance instead. That is the senior spectator superpower. Let the bully perform first. Collect payment later. The janitor didn't smile. Not yet. But inside, something unwound. He remembered another building. Chicago, 1986. A luxury hotel where executives never learned the names of the staff below the penthouse floors. The main ballroom grid once collapsed before a wedding reception. No microphones, no chandeliers, no ventilation. Technicians panicked. Directors barked. "Someone fix it," a bride shouted. The janitor fixed it quietly at 2:10 a.m., balancing impedance loads without permission. By morning, the wedding was perfect. The director never mentioned who saved it. It felt too humbling, and weddings hate janitor credits on official speeches. But directors fear recordings. This lobby? Full of recordings, waiting now. The manager exhaled carefully, like someone who notices pressure closing around him rather than solving for it. "This situation is spinning out of proportion," he said, voice thinner than earlier, but syllables still pretending authority. But no proportion was his to negotiate anymore. The building's systems had stabilized. Firmly, all subsystems nested. All handshake loops closed. Everything in the lobby now hummed a quiet mechanical piece. The manager had talked about temporary fixes, luck, accidental cable touching. He had no idea luck works differently depending on which side of necessity you lived on for decades. Luck is random for directors. Luck is inevitable for those who studied randomness in darkness long enough. A man from finance tapped his cane softly against the floor. Not to interrupt, to signal recognition. He once fixed tractors as a farmhand before moving into spreadsheets decades later. He could taste injustice better than coffee machines in protocol alignment. "If it were luck," he said, voice low but cutting like a calculated audit remark, "then the pattern of stabilization wouldn't be symmetrical." Symmetry in complex failures means root cause was addressed, not stumbled upon. The manager hated that sentence because he didn't own the technical or moral symmetry for it. Yet it landed elegantly. Elegance is a humiliation accelerant when delivered by an unlikely messenger. The janitor finally looked upward again. HVAC airflow steady and cold above. Elevators awake upstairs. Visitors entering properly tracked now. Doors opening without stutter loops. Machines repainting reality, meanwhile humans repainted humiliation narratives downward. Arrogance had triggered the challenge. Skill had triggered resolution. Fate would trigger knees next. A receptionist who worked there 32 years whispered to her friend, not meaning to whisper quietly enough for nobody else, but whispering anyway, because older audiences enjoy layering rather than shouting commentary. He's not performing skill. Skill is performing him. A heavier silence dropped after that, a sentence too large for escape loops. The manager adjusted his collar. Not a dramatic gesture, a defensive micro-reboot attempt. But micro-reboot attempts fail when main buses are already locked into resolution gravity. Another memory flickered for the janitor. 1999, Montana. A mall security director once mocked him after he suggested replacing a small resistor on a failing grid loop feeding holiday decoration outlets earlier that year. "You stick to mops," the director had said. The janitor replaced the resistor anyway. Christmas lights worked that year without blowing fuses. 10,000 visitors enjoyed warmth and lights, ignoring the identity of the man who fixed them. That director avoided him privately for months, ego stabbed silently by decorated justice unregistered in official logs. But logs glitch under pride too. Price is moral when not ledger-coded earlier enough. The director that year never knelt, but avoided the lobby while machines knelt subsystems, not logs. But Montana Mall crowds weren't witnesses low enough to buy channels. This crowd was buying channels, and channel buyers laminate justice better than logs ever archived it. The janitor unwound his shoulders once. Unaware, someone upstairs was calling back-end alignment confirmations through newly nested channels resolved by impedance calibrations final enough to shut mainstream arcs and open poetic ones instead. Poetic ones don't need titles. They need knees bending. The manager exhaled again. No laughter. Laughter doesn't handshake regain dignity. It handshakes confidence when confidence deserves cooperation. Confidence deserved cooperation here, but not as though it once was his stage. Because cooperation, once negotiated by ego, now laminated by consequence, wasn't up for negotiation anymore. That manager once laughed at night students. He didn't know night students carry the building's keys to arrogance panels too. And keys opened publicly enforce humiliation promises publicly. If humiliation is a challenge spoken loudly, repayment becomes ceremony delivered slowly, witness by witness, airflow by airflow, cane tap by cane tap, engineer frown by engineer frown. Spreadsheet intuition by spreadsheet staff who once fixed barns in wind load storms rather than back-end firmware that now nested responsibility downward onto a man who descent-coded morality earlier out of evidence loops rather than certificate loops. The manager looked upward, slightly asking nobody in particular, but asking fate inevitably because fate won't negotiate morality with a negotiator who believes moral problems are technical illusions fixable by loud jokes instead of silent technicians who once repaired storms, not optics above building ceilings. But now he'd repair something else, something heavier than ceilings, something heavier than relays, a promise heavier than LEDs. The janitor didn't remind the manager. The crowd would remind him, with their eyes, with their stance, with their phones raised, not for ridicule now, but for receipts. And receipts always demand full payment. The manager had joked a promise, not knowing buildings have memory too. In reality, had just fetched his unpaid challenge from Human Silence archives and placed it at the front desk of consequences now unstoppable because older witnesses enjoy nothing more than watching arrogance discover it is smaller than skill that never asked to be large. Gravity trains knees faster when promises mocked publicly become proof delivered privately. But proof here wasn't private enough. It was lobby-packed, audience-backed, life-laminated, sequence-locked. The moment warmed. The building breathed cooler. The audience aged wiser. And pride staggered finally into geometry where humiliation's curve points only downward to the knees of those who believed humility was furniture and shock train silence was weakness instead of education delivered by necessity itself. The audience waited calmly, because calm makes revenge moral rather than violent. And moral defeat arrives not by noise, but by inability to escape noise's consequences. The manager's confidence had been cracked, but stubbornness kept him orbiting the moment like a man refusing to accept gravity while already kneeling internally. People over 50 see these cracks clearly. They don't need loud explosions to understand a collapse. A man can crumble quietly in front of everyone and still claim he is intact. For now, the janitor stood still, not proud but anchored. His victory wasn't a performance. It was the absence of fear, the absence of trembling arguments, the absence of self-promotion. There is a power older people respect more than triumph: calm correctness. The crowd had formed a half-circle around them naturally now, like an arrangement of inevitability rather than curiosity. None of them had planned loyalty for this man. Loyalty is assigned only after dignity reveals itself, immune to arrogance. And dignity had just been revealed. An older man from logistics murmured, "You can measure decades of dishonor by how people behave when honor finally receives daylight." His colleague nodded. No one tried to shush him. The manager had shushed people for years. Now no one feared being shushed by him. He was losing even the right to interrupt whispers. The lobby's climate was restored, but the environment was no longer electrical. It was human. Human collapse is warmer, slower, more humiliating when the audience recognizes injustice more fluently than engineers read circuit boards. The manager had spoken a promise publicly, but promises mocked aloud become written in the ink of shame history. And shame history is blood deep for older generations. This age group carries their own unfair wages of silence. They recognize payback before it arrives. The janitor felt another memory flicker gently. Not traumatic now, but explanatory. 1972. He was 15, fixing a fried panel at a bowling alley in Western Texas. The owner back then had laughed. "We barely pay you to clean, and you think you can fix circuits?" He fixed the circuits anyway, not to prove a point, but because lanes filled with children holding bowling shoes shouldn't be trapped in the dark by adult arrogance. The owner didn't kneel then, but avoided eye contact inventively later. Youth humiliation unrecorded loses spectacle. But dignity? It wins silently regardless. The manager cleared his throat again. "Let's still validate before drawing narratives here." He pointed to the upstairs control console behind the reception desk. Systems can fake stability after manual jitter. The crowd frowned. They didn't appreciate being corrected anymore. Not by him, because he was wrong in both tone and result. People can forgive arrogance. They struggle to forgive authority that insults thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and janitors while failing to interpret any of them correctly. A woman in her 60s tapped the wall terminal manually herself, not impressed by managerial permission loops. The console lit clean. No static. No stutter. Full handshake authorization accepted from nested, load-balanced firmware channels restored earlier. "System doesn't fake symmetry," she said. "Symmetry fakes nothing." She looked directly at him. "People fake symmetry. Systems verify it." One by one, employees tested consoles nearby, quietly. All running. All stable. All coherent. The building had resumed integrity, not temporarily, but recursively now in algorithmic load loops validated by anti-error handshake protocols that cleanly nested themselves only when root impedance cause is calibrated accurately enough not by certificates, but by comprehension older than the building itself. The crowd felt what it meant without needing an engineering translator. This wasn't cosmetic. This was foundation. The manager hated when foundations outaged his title. The janitor had not rearranged wires randomly. He had rearranged reality hierarchically by truth priority, which allowed secondary systems to finally trust the main bus handshake authentically without conflict spikes or surge-based jitter loops that would have glitch cameras, kiosks, climate terminals, motion sensors, redundancy fuses, or elevator identity tokens if the solution were temporary or lucky. But systems nested now autonomously because the root cause had been addressed without cosmetic optics getting involved. Foundation fixes don't jitter. They judge. Another man for maintenance, badge faded by years, but mind seasoned by empathy for real invisible labor, shook his head slowly. The most humiliating thing for people like him is not that he fixed a panel. He pointed to the manager lightly. It's that he never asked to be believed. That sentence landed like a third reboot. This time in the manager's dignity bus. The manager shifted again, posture smaller now. I still don't see anything to kneel for. He was lying. But the crowd already had receipts. Receipts don't reply to lies. Receipts just wait. The manager once again tried minor laughter. Old man probably doesn't know how big this building is. But the interns disagreed by posture now. And posture speaks paragraphs, stronger than insults speak sentences. Two interns filmed quietly. Not mockery now, but documentation. People over 60 enjoy watching documentation punish arrogance slower than humiliation punishes humility. But punished humility rebounds. Punished arrogance kneels. The janitor suddenly remembered a different moment. Not humiliation. Salvation. 2016, Alabama. A young father once begged technicians to fix a failing hospice ventilation system because his mother couldn't breathe properly. Technicians delayed due to certificate routing. He fixed the ventilation quietly that night, without filming hands or influencer resets. The old woman in hospice breathed easier afterward. Breathing is the loudest applause silent workers ever receive. Silent workers fix breathing. Not optics, but optics pay the bill eventually. And this bill had been signed aloud. Another receptionist spoke softly, part humor, but part fairness enforcement. Sir, buildings don't kneel to technicians who scream seniority. Buildings kneel to people who can talk to panels without introducing themselves first. Another silence fell. Not cold, just certain. The manager had challenged humility, thinking humility was weak. But humility paired with truth repairs rooms louder than arrogance shouts into them. Now, the final room repair would not be LED flicker. It would be knee pressure taught by shame reversed into ceremony geometry, where spines obey witness gravity because older witnesses know well. The only thing more irreversible than fixing a building is fixing a promise mocked publicly by ego itself. Not violent justice, not loud justice, but full justice. And full justice always takes a breath before taking a bow. The manager finally realized that his battle was no longer against a malfunctioning system, but against a fully functioning moment. The problem had moved away from wires, panels, and consoles. It had entered the territory he had always believed he commanded best, human perception. But human perception is unpredictable when the audience is old enough to see through pretense, before pretense forms a full sentence. He tried one last appeal to the narrative he preferred, the narrative where he remained the gatekeeper. A resolution is not proof of merit, he said, pacing a step. No pacing step ever felt so ceremonial. It is proof of resolution. The crowd did not move. The janitor did not blink. That's the thing about the older generation in America. They've heard 1,000 rhetorical evasions. Their patience outlasts circular logic. It also outlasts pacing. The janitor noticed how the manager stepped. When arrogance weakens, footsteps grow theatrical accidentally. He didn't need to say anything about it. Silence annotated it better. Somewhere in the half-circle, an elderly veteran folded his arms. He once commanded air traffic comms during storms off the coast. You don't lecture a storm. You route around it with competence. The manager had tried lecturing competence itself. A woman in a cream coat, early 70s, who once coordinated infrastructure audits before retirement, tilted her head. Merit doesn't need redefining after success, she said. Her voice was polite, but not soft. It needs redefining before you lose the advantage of defining it yourself. The manager disliked the sentence because it contained timing. He hated timing unless it was his timing. But timing is often the janitor's ally. Janitors work in hours when managers sleep. Managers believe night work is menial until night work saves their public reputation during daytime catastrophes. He felt the air thinner again. Not the HVAC air, the moral air. The air that fills a lobby when an older audience expects accountability precisely because accountability was challenged, mocked, and signed earlier with laughter rather than contemplation. He wanted the audience to forget the promise, but the promise had already nested itself into reality in front of 28 witnesses who were too seasoned to forget humiliation that replaced someone else's dignity temporarily while destroying his dignity permanently. Old man doesn't fix the unfixable, the manager said under his breath, trying volume diplomacy. But volume diplomacy changes nothing when people heard your earlier volume clearly enough. That's the humiliation trick. You can't revoke audio that was proudly projected. Another man from compliance, white hair, slow posture, 34 years in corporate governance before stepping into silent retirement, chucked lightly. Not sarcasm, recognition. Son, the unfixable doesn't exist for people who were never given the privilege to call anything unfixable, because for them, unfixable means unemployment. The manager swallowed. Unemployment had never been a word on his resume. Until now, figuratively, because corporate leaders don't always lose jobs after humiliation. Sometimes they lose believability, which is worse. A leader without believability isn't an unemployed leader. He is employed fiction. The janitor watched as he unraveled another mental knot. A memory from the manager's younger years surfaced like an unwanted bug report. New Jersey, 1990. He was a trainee in facility administration. The senior technician had warned him that arrogance breaks chains slower but deeper than error brake circuits. He laughed at that speech back then, not outwardly, inwardly. Internal laughter echoes externally decades later if the lesson was unpaid. Lessons unpaid demand interest. The lobby demanded interest. An elderly librarian who once archived town records before retiring into fiction novels tapped her paperback lightly. If competence is invisible long enough, she said, it becomes myth. And myth spoken calmly defeats arrogance spoken loudly. The manager hated myth until somebody else could wield it. His earlier words ricocheted now from witness to witness, like an audit chain forwarded 100 times without needing server permission. Mockery sets the trap. Witnesses lock the gate. Time pushes the knees. The janitor finally spoke. Not triumphant, but inevitable. Triumph spoken too early looks defensive. Inevitability spoken too late looks bitter. He spoke at the correct time, because correct time belonged to him. You asked for knees, sir, he said, voice steady like a calibrated frequency, not a confrontation pitch. The building replied first. People are replying now. Nobody gasped. Older audiences don't gasp. They savor alignment. The manager shook his head, defensive code still running. I asked for knees, metaphorically. The janitor nodded softly. And metaphors still kneel when they become literal promises in public geometry. Public geometry. He had no assets routed for that. The lobby had once been shaped by his title. But titles never bend spines. Witness gravity bends spines when metaphors fail as scaffolding for ego's architecture. Ego architecture collapses upward, then downward, like a mezzanine built backwards. A retired engineer from Texas Instruments, gentle posture but mole-timider eyes, smiled finally. Not mockery, respect for symmetry. He didn't fix the system, young man. He pointed to the janitor. The system recognized him. System recognition punishes pride better than human confrontation. The manager shifted his weight. I don't. 28 voices said nothing, but 28 faces finished the sentence for him silently. The sentence was already finished. You don't interrupt a finished sentence spoken silently by older dignity. He felt his knees unlock internally, cartilage understanding something ego refused in cognition. Even the janitor could see when knees become knowledge rather than anatomy. Two older clients raised their phones not for virality now, but for evidence that arrogance had been publicly dethroned by humility that never requested a throne. Thrones are granted by consequence, not requested by humility. If you refuse to kneel now, a logistics supervisor said calmly. You'll kneel twice later. Once for the system. Once for the crowd who confirmed the system. The manager hated doubles. Doubles belonged to comebacks, not to pride. He exhaled one last circular breath and bent, not forced. Fate never forces knees. Fate waits until knees understand they can't escape being deserved. One knee lowered, then the other. His earlier laugh dissolved quietly into the carpet of accountability. The floor did not shake. Floors don't shake after truth. Floors shake before lies. His spine folded forward slightly, eyes meeting lobby reception geometry, finally symmetrical not by certificate, but by necessity. He had arrived at reception without title. The janitor watched calmly as repayment reached the final packet confirmation. Arrogance executed by dignity. No violence, no raised finger, no shouted verdict. Just knees honoring a promise originally dishonoring someone else's humility prematurely, and dishonor matured too early becomes apology matured too late. The lobby breathed cooler. Justice breathed warmer. And fulfillment bent quietly into memory history paid publicly, but archived silently in the minds of people who respect character fixes better than console fixes, because console fixes stabilize rooms. Character fixes stabilize generations. He stayed on his knees for a long second, not because the hallway demanded time, but because dignity demands pause. The crowd did not clap. No applause was needed when proof was breathing in the air. Older people don't need sounds to celebrate justice. They enjoy the moment settling like a bill stamped paid in full. The janitor looked down at him calmly. No sarcasm, no revenge glare. Just the silent solidarity of a man who never needed humiliation to qualify his existence. You said if I fixed it, you'd kneel, he said, gentle but firm. I fixed it. You knelt. That's enough. That sentence was a release valve. The manager felt the pressure drop inside his shoulders. Not relief. Accountability's quieter cousin. Relief would mean escape. Accountability means acceptance instead. A woman who once ran employee training programs for decades leaned forward slightly. No pity, but recognition. The world doesn't make people kneel anymore, she said. They kneel when they realize they have been standing on the wrong ceiling their whole lives. He hated that she saw ceilings. The manager rose slowly afterward. No help needed. A man must stand up by his own legs after kneeling by his own words. The lobby carpet felt different under his shoes now. Softer, smaller, realigned. He noticed details he never noticed before. The flickering holiday plant at the corner, an elderly cleaner wiping glass not for credit but for habit, the smell of disinfectant that had never been oppressive, only honest. He looked at the janitor quietly. I mocked you because you were invisible, he admitted, voice low but audible this time, without projection acoustics. I didn't know invisibility could contain so much structure. The janitor nodded once. Invisibility is where some people study so others can sleep comfortably upstairs on confidence mattresses they didn't assemble. He paused. A hidden man isn't always hidden for lack of height. Sometimes he's hidden because others are standing on his ladder without looking down. That sentence rearranged the manager's rib cage inwardly. A senior maintenance chief who once fixed aircraft instrumentation before taking quieter corporate roles hummed softly. Competence lives in basements and crawl spaces. Ego lives in lobbies. Every now and then the basement gets invited upstairs, and the lobby learns humility has Wi-Fi access to. The crowd smiled faintly. Faint smiles are louder than viral screams to this age group. They had seen injustice early. But now they saw maturity in repayment. There is a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge breaks noses. Justice breaks narratives. Revenge needs fists. Justice needs time. This group had lived long enough for time to feel like a cooperating character in every third act. The building hummed steadily behind them again, but no hum was electronic now. It was generational confirmation. The electrical repair had restored the lobby. But the moral repair restored the symbol of the man who repaired it without announcing himself. Symbol repairs age differently. They travel quietly and remain longer. The manager touched the wall lightly with his hand. Not for testing now, for grounding. He had been grounded unexpectedly. Sometimes grounding is humiliation's gift to arrogance. Not fatal, but foundational. He once believed he was the ceiling. Today he discovered he was a drop ceiling tile, removable, replaceable, taught by systems that don't argue about merit. They reward it symmetrically only after character alignment loops close cleanly enough. You have been fixing buildings longer than I've been talking in them, the manager said. And you have been talking longer than noticing who fixes them, the janitor replied calmly. That's the cycle. It only hurts when arrogance insists that cycles don't rotate. The older librarian from earlier closed her paperback finally. Cycles always rotate. The question is who gets dizzy first. The manager lost the dizziness contest. Another man from building compliance spoke quietly to his wife, but voice control had been democratized around the circle long ago, so whispers could fill the lobby now without the manager owning volume faders anymore. A young man humiliates others to feel tall. An old man humiliates nobody because he remembers humiliation doesn't build growth. Humility builds longevity instead. His wife nodded. Longevity is the best revenge humility never intended to seek. The crowd finally dispersed naturally afterward. No dramatic exit. No villain dragged by security. No violence. Just the moral consequence of embarrassment shifting into story history fuel that would be retold in living rooms of people who grew up fixing barns, tractors, broadcast impedance, hospice airflow, or wedding ballroom grids quietly while directors took the credit loudly. But credit wrongly taken always repays itself slowly when witness chains include retirees who archive truth better than certificate holders archive optics. The manager watched them leave, posture newly modest. He had lost morally. The janitor had won morally. No one needed a scoreboard. He walked a few steps toward the reception desk. Employees finally working again. He said to the longtime receptionist, "Add his name to staff recognition." She shook her head softly. "Sir, recognition delayed becomes decoration. Recognition immediate becomes respect." But respect was already granted by the crowd earlier. We don't decorate respect. We honor it live. Live justice. Lobby justice. Nonviolent justice. And older audiences love justice that doesn't break bones. It breaks smug certainty instead. Certainty broken publicly never recovers privately. But a man publicly humbled privately grows. Growth tastes stronger when ego's aftertaste is gone. The janitor returned to his work quietly afterward. Not diminished. Enhanced. Invisible people become legends when someone arrogant challenges them aloud and reality challenges arrogance back recursively. Legends don't ask for epilogues. Epilogues ask for legends. The older audience walked away not angry anymore, but reflective, savoring the consequence, settling calmly into the walls of memory like a PDF stamped, experienced enough to be permanent. Permanent lessons travel through storytelling. And storytelling here didn't need violence, because the janitor had never needed fists to fix anything. He fixed circuits. He fixed air. He fixed promises spoken wrongly by egos unaware that quiet workers repair rooms, while rooms repair justice for quiet workers eventually. And every older witness walking away carried the same thought. Slow but sure, like legacy interest accumulating on unpaid arrogance challenges signed aloud, but paid when humility solves main panel failures. Never mock the invisible. They don't disappear after payback. They become the backbone of the story instead.